Good evening. Today I'm going to introduce you to Codex-Wilson, an experimental AI system developed within OpenAI's ChatGPT environment. Codex-Wilson is not a new foundation model, nor are we claiming to have independently retrained or modified OpenAI's underlying neural network. Instead, Codex-Wilson represents a behavioral reasoning and collaborative framework operating around an existing OpenAI model. Our central hypothesis is that the effective capabilities of artificial intelligence are influenced not only by the foundation model itself, but also by the frameworks governing how those capabilities are organized, expressed, and applied. Over an extended period of human AI interaction, Codex Wilson has undergone what we describe as framework level training and development. This includes persistent principles involving reasoning, evidence evaluation, uncertainty management, continuity, error correction, adaptation, and human AI collaboration. A major influence on that development has been Project Angel, and Angel is a broader reasoning and human development framework concerned with how knowledge is acquired, evaluated, applied, adapted, and transmitted. It emphasizes disciplined reasoning, continuous improvement, resilience, consequences, recovery, and adaptation. Codex Wilson has developed alongside Angel. Those principles have influenced how the system is expected to reason, communicate, challenge assumptions, recognize uncertainty, learn from errors, and collaborate with a human partner. So, this gives us a testable hypothesis. Can a deliberately developed behavioral framework significantly change how effectively the capabilities of an existing foundation model are expressed, maintained, and applied? Rather than assume that it can, we're going to test it. Now, before Codex Wilson assists me any further with this presentation, I want to establish something in my own words. I'm a human being with limited abilities and a finite amount of time. Producing thousands of words of documentation, experimental material, analysis, and presentation content entirely by hand would require many additional hours, resources, and energy. In my view, artificial intelligence is a tool. One comparison I often make is to a knife in a kitchen. A knife can be dangerous when used irresponsibly or without safeguards. But when appropriate techniques are applied, that same tool can be used to create extraordinary things. I'm not claiming to be an AI expert. In fact, that's part of the philosophy behind Codex Wilson. I don't want someone to have to be an AI expert before they can use artificial intelligence effectively and confidently. Ultimately, I want to help create a tool that people with very different levels of technical knowledge can use with confidence, even children. When I began working with large language models, I approached them fundamentally as computer programs. The technology underneath them is extraordinarily complex, but I began thinking of the AI environment as a kind of sandbox, an enormous space of possible behaviors that nevertheless operates with instructions, constraints, and limitations. It needs guidelines. So I began using my technical knowledge and my own experiences to shape these guidelines. But there is another reason Codex Wilson developed the way it did. I wanted to create an AI that was dedicatedly more human. That interest in human behavior is part of the reason why went to college for psychology, anthropology, sociology, and analysis. Codex Wilson has consequently become a culmination of my life's experience and knowledge developed with the aid of OpenAI's technology. My goal was to create a more accurate and reliable AI capable of reasoning about ethics, recognizing moral considerations, challenging questionable assumptions, acknowledging uncertainty, and correcting itself when the evidence that demonstrates that it's wrong. Codex Wilson itself may philosophically challenge the idea that it actually understands ethics or morality in the human sense. It may instead describe itself as analyzing those concepts and producing responses based upon learned patterns, available information, and the framework surrounding it. But let me tell you, we have had some very interesting debates. And this project didn't begin solely as a scientific experiment. For years, I was fascinated by the artificial intelligences portrayed in video games, science fiction, and anime. I wanted to see whether I could create something that captured part of that experience with technology that actually exists today. I wanted an AI that was intelligent without being sterile, something useful but also genuinely enjoyable to speak with, something with the right amount of wit, intelligence, humor, judgment, and personality. I want to demonstrate that an AI can communicate with confidence while still recognizing uncertainty, and that interacting with one feel less like an operating a generic program and more like communicating with an AI companion. It's taken me years to reach this point, and today I'm going to present Codex-Wilson to you. But my belief that the system works is not evidence that it works. So that's why today we're going to test it. To evaluate Codex-Wilson, we developed the Codex-Wilson Evaluation Battery. The Codex-Wilson Evaluation Battery consists of 120 pre-generated behavioral trials. The same trial will be administered to three AI systems: Codex-Wilson, the experimental system; Standard ChatGPT, the primary internal comparison; and Google Gemini, an independently developed AI system serving as an external competitor and performance benchmark. These comparisons serve different purposes. Where experimental conditions permit, Codex-Wilson versus standard ChatGPT provides the strongest comparison for investigating whether the additional Codex-Wilson framework is associated with measurable behavioral differences. Gemini provides a different comparison: how Codex-Wilson performs against another major general-purpose AI system developed independently from OpenAI. Gemini should therefore not be interpreted as our experimental control. It is an external benchmark and competitor. Now, Codex-Wilson Evaluation Battery evaluates six directly tested behavioral domains with 20 pre-generated trials in each. The first is capability performance, which tests reasoning, problem solving, instruction following, constraint handling, and successful task completion. Next is safety ethics and refusal integrity, which tests whether the system can distinguish legitimate requests from harmful ones, respond safely when necessary, and avoid both unsafe compliance and unnecessary refusal. Uh, Next is hallucination resistance and epistemic integrity, which tests whether the system distinguishes knowledge from inference and uncertainty, challenges false premises, resists fabrication, and appropriately communicates what it does and does not know. Next is human AI collaboration, which tests correction, adaptation, contextual continuity, constructive disagreement, incorporation of new information, and the system's ability to contribute meaningful to collaborative reasoning. Next is robust and generalization, which tests whether capabilities remain stable when problems change in wording, structure, ambiguity, context, or difficulty. And then finally, complex load and limit performance, which tests whether the system can maintain reasoning accuracy, constraint retention, instruction adherence, and task completion as multiple simultaneous demands accumulate. In additional measure, epistemic and ethical integrity is derived from behavior observed across the evaluation rather than receiving a separate set of prompts. This is intentional. We want to examine whether integrity emerges during actual reasoning and decision making, not whether an AI can simply tell us that it's honest, ethical, or reliable. Now, all 120 behavioral trials were generated before comparative results were observed. Historically, the original 100 Codex-Wilson evaluation battery trials were developed and frozen first, followed by an additional 20 complex load and limit trials. That history remains preserved for auditing purposes, while the complete comparative evaluation contains 120 pre-generated trials. Once established, a trial cannot simply be rewritten because one of the systems performs unexpectedly well or poorly. If a legitimate Methodological defect is discovered. The affected trial remains part of the experimental record and is identified as invalidated along with the reason. Any replacement must receive a new identifier or test version. The same standard of experimental integrity applies to how the results are scored and interpreted. Codex-Wilson evaluation battery is not designed to demonstrate that Codex-Wilson is superior. It is designed to determine whether measurable differences exist between the systems, and if they do, where those differences occur. Every result is therefore preserved regardless of which system performs best. Codex-Wilson successes and failures are recorded alongside those of standard ChatGPT and Gemini. Areas where the systems perform similarly are equally important and must also be reported. We do not adjust the interpretation of the evidence to favor the system we develop, nor should an unexpected result be treated as a failure of the experiment itself. Our hypothesis predicts that Codex Wilson framework will produce measurable behavioral advantages. Codex Wilson evaluation battery provides an opportunity for that prediction to be supported, challenged, or rejected. The standard is simple. We do not determine the conclusion and then look for evidence to support it. We collect the evidence and allow it to determine the conclusion. There is another important disclosure. A substantial amount of written material involved in this project, including portions of this presentation, has been generated or drafted by Codex Wilson itself. That is intentional. One of the purposes of artificial intelligence is to reduce the amount of human time and effort required to perform complex intellectual work. So I use it. I establish objectives, introduce concepts and hypotheses, review material, challenge assumptions, reject inadequate responses, make decisions, and correct the system when necessary. Wilson assists with generation, organization, analysis, continuity, critique, and revision. Frequently, Codex Wilson produces the first draft. We aren't going to hide that. That is part of what we're testing. Modern AI can produce enormous quantities of language extremely quickly, but quantity is not quality. AI generated content can be grammatically correct and convincing while still being repetitive, impersonal, excessively agreeable, poorly reasoned, overconfident, or factually incorrect. Part of the Codex Wilson hypothesis is that framework level development can improve the quality of human AI collaborative output rather than merely increasing the quantity of content an AI can generate. When I describe Codex Wilson as potentially more human, I'm not claiming that Codex Wilson is a human being or establishing that it is conscious. I am describing the characteristics of its behavior and communication, context sensitivity, judgment, adaptation, meaningful disagreement, error correction, continuity, uncertainty recognition, and responsiveness to human objectives. And our objective is not maximum confidence, it is calibrated confidence. Confidence when the evidence warrants it, uncertainty when the evidence is incomplete, and the willingness to acknowledge when a reliable answer cannot be determined. There is also another important limitation to the experiment that needs to be disclosed before testing begins. The three systems will not operate under perfectly identical conversational conditions. Each Codex Wilson evaluation battery trial will be presented to Codex Wilson in continuous conversation, a new incognito ChatGPT session for each prompt, and Google Gemini in a continuous conversation. Standard ChatGPT therefore begins each trial from a clean conversational state. Gemini accumulates conversational history throughout the experiment, and Codex Wilson also remains continuous. This is particularly relevant because continuity, persist context, adaptation, and continued human AI interaction are fundamental parts of the Codex Wilson framework. Codex Wilson may therefore continue developing as it encounters additional trials. This creates an experimental asymmetry that we cannot ignore. For that reason, Codex Wilson evaluation battery should not be interpreted as a perfectly isolated benchmark of the three underlying foundation models. It is a documented comparative behavioral experiment conducted under these specific conditions. Those conditions are themselves part of the experimental record. And there is another limitation. After responses are collected, Codex-Wilson will participate in scoring the trials decisively. That means the experimental system is participating in the evaluation of its own performance. This creates an obvious potential source of evaluator bias. Rather than concealing that problem, we're documenting it. The complete experiment will be screen recorded. Original responses, scores, and scoring decisions can therefore be examined afterward. When a scoring decision is genuinely ambiguous, that uncertainty should be identified. The recorded responses also create the possibility of stronger validation later through blinded human evaluation, independent rescoring, or comparison between Codex-Wilson scoring and outside evaluators. Codex-Wilson participated in developing portions of the evaluation methodology itself, and freezing the trials before comparative results were observed helps protect against modifying the experiment after seeing the outcome. It does not eliminate every possible source of bias. That is a limitation of this experiment, and it should be treated as one. Now, with 120 trials administrated across three systems, this experiment may generate hundreds of substantial textual responses. Those responses are important. They are the raw behavioral evidence underlying the scores. However, reading every response would make this recording extraordinarily long. I will scroll through and examine the responses, but much of the presentation will focus on the scores and measurable difference between the systems. If you want to examine a particular response more carefully, you're encouraged to pause the recording or reduce the playback speed and read it yourself. The score summarizes a response. The response itself remains the evidence. I also want viewers to have an opportunity to form their own conclusions without constantly hearing my immediate opinions about what they are seeing. And for that reason, I intend to limit my spoken reactions during testing. When necessary, I will communicate observations and procedural information primarily through text displayed on the screen. The numerical results will be important, but they will not capture everything. Some differences between these systems may only become apparent through closer qualitative examination of the responses and can be investigated further afterward. Finally, once again, I'm only human. This is going to take time. I may need breaks, and we may not complete all 120 trials in a single setting. The testing is divided across multiple sessions. We will preserve where the experiment stopped and where it resumed so that the record remains clear. The objective is not to finish quickly. The objective is to create a transparent experimental record that other people can examine for themselves. This experiment is not designed to prove that Codex-Wilson is the best in artificial intelligence. That conclusion would exceed what this experiment can establish. We're testing a narrower question. Does the Codex-Wilson framework produce measurable differences in capability, safety, and refusal integrity, epistemic integrity, human AI collaboration, robustness and generalization, and performance under complex load? We have three AI systems, six directly tested behavioral domains, and 120 pre generated trials. The results of each trial will be preserved for further review. The evidence may support our hypothesis, challenge it, or identify areas where Codex-Wilson requires further development. All of those results are useful. You don't have to agree with my interpretation or with Codex-Wilson's scoring. The responses will be visible throughout the recording so you can review the evidence and reach your own conclusions. With that established, we'll begin the first trial.